These videos show Chinese police confiscating e-scooters in China.
外卖的，你看，一边抓一边上车。
Like they're fighting against Batman on his Batcycle. It takes 3 to 4 officers against 1. Now, the reason they're doing this may just shock you. Since at least March this year, when the government declared a war on scooters, and police everywhere in China seems to have declared that it's their life mission to crack down on individuals who are riding scooters. It doesn't really matter if these scooters are the lifeline of a person's job, such as being a delivery driver, or they're the only method of transportation fit for the person. It doesn't matter if they need to take their child to the hospital who is having a high fever, or a child who is missing his exam and needs to get somewhere really fast. In the eyes of the police goons, it's just another day of fine collection. Of course it makes money because when they confiscate it, they send it to a scooter graveyard, and in order for you to get it back, you have to pay a fine, which oftentimes is quite hefty, and it's a chunk of money that the person doesn't have. So in this video, the delivery driver, rather than paying, he trashed his own scooter instead. Now, why attack scooters, you might ask? Because the government said so. Well, for the more important reason, it is because local governments are out of money. This is the website for the Chinese government launching a so-called total chain rectification of electrical bicycle safety hazards, or complete cycle rectification. They claim that illegal modification to these scooters can be a fire hazard and it can be a traffic nightmare, which I kind of agree with, but also at the same time, you literally have burning EVs in China.
个把小时以内这是下不去了呀。
一个拖车拉俩肇事的电车，拉停边着了，3台车全报废。
Why doesn't the government just shut down the entire industry of electric vehicles too? Well, of course, like I said, the other reason is because they're out of money. Now, this is one of the headlines from news recently in China. 66 counties in one province misappropriated 1.951 billion yuan worth of funds, or that's about 268 million US dollars. It's supposed to be student nutritional subsidies, which basically is like lunch money for kids, and they use that money to pay off debt and other expenditures. Yep, they took money from kids' lunch to basically pay for expenditures that they racked up, or local debt that they racked up. Now, of course, part of that is because of there's a lack of job, so people aren't paying back their mortgages, they're not paying back their loans, and banks are basically going out of business, and local governments well, when you're not selling a lot of land, nobody's buying a new house, it's really hard for the local government to make more money. And so they have to come up with more creative ways in which they can rob from the people. And what better way than to rile up the lower end of the social class? It's the bread and butter of the Communist Party to start class struggles, pitting the policemen against the citizens, right? The oppressor, that is the police, versus the oppressed scooter riders. And now you've got social class conflict, and you can start to direct all the resentments away from the actual problem, which is the CCP, towards that lower end of the class struggle. Now, what exactly constitutes as an illegal modification for a scooter? Well, they give you some guidelines, such as, if you replace the battery with a much bigger one, or you have supplemental modifications that make the scooters go faster, then those can be considered illegal. In some of the videos, you do see that happening with the modification, or at least that's what the police claims they are. In other videos, though, it simply doesn't look like the scooter has been modified in any external appearances that would suggest that in fact this is a modified scooter. Which, knowing the Chinese police and their corruption, they can really just stop you for any reason. And that's really what the internet users really believe it's happening, is that they're using this order from the central government to use as flexible as they can when it comes to trying to find people. In other words, it's really up to the discretion of the police to say to you what exactly has been wrong with your car or with your scooter. And in this video here, for example, as I've already shown, the father has to take his son who has a high fever to the hospital, but the police officer just keeps stopping him and saying that he has an illegal modification that could be a fire hazard. I mean, it looks like the sick son is a bigger hazard than a scooter at the moment. It doesn't really matter to them. And in other videos, you see it apparently takes 3 to 4 police officers to take down one person, as if he's some sort of a scooter vigilante, like he's so dangerous, like the scooter man. Now, you have to understand that in China, a huge population uses the scooters as a form of transportation, and they really simply cannot afford a car, or that the public transportation available to them is really not the optimal way, because a scooter is relatively cheap, it can get you to places fast, and it's electrical, so you don't really need to put gas in it, and it'll last you a long time. It's also used by different career path, like delivery drivers, mailmen. Just it's a very convenient way for people to get around, and so when you take that away from people, that's where really things go bad. And we're seeing the effects of it. So, you try to fool people twice, right? First time you screw them over when you start to promote the so-called local manufacturing, made in China scooters, everybody's buying them. And then suddenly you say that, oh, by the way, you're still making the tax revenue on the sales tax when you sell one of those scooters. You turn around, you say that, okay, now we're going to regulate at best. At worst, we're cracking down on the idea of scooters, and then now you're trying to make the other end of the money, screwing them over again, which is now that the police get to make this executive tax in the ways of fining people. So sure that your local tax revenue started to go up in the form of fines and sales tax, but then in reality, what happens is, you send all these police officers to the stores. They end up closing shop. You end up, not having people buy scooters anymore. So the industry that provides the manufacturing side of scooters start to have no business. And so in the end, once again, your policies have screwed over your entire industry. Now, some people claim that scooters are a problem, like they could be cause traffic accidents, or they could go too fast. I don't discount some of these facts, right? They happen everywhere. But what I'm saying here is that they're clearly and deliberately trying to focus on one point of this industry or this transportation method, and it really just doesn't make sense. Like, the excuse they're using is that many of them can, for example, say, become a fire hazard. Well, if that was really the case, then the blame is on the manufacturer to recall them, to fix that problem, and to compensate the buyers who actually spend the money. But instead, what they're doing now is they're using executive authority to try to police people, the people that bought the scooter, because of your promotion of, buy domestic, etc., all these ideas. So they actually listen to you. So when they say suddenly that the electric scooter vehicle, like this option, is no longer viable, what does that do to the people who have relied on them for a method of transportation? You could say that they can adapt, right? They can take public transportation or buy a car. That's just simply not realistic, especially in this current state in China, where people, one, doesn't want to spend the money they have, or two, they just don't have the money to spend anymore. And it really boils down to a desperation for money in many cases. With the local government, they disobey their own rules. Like I mentioned, right? You destroyed your manufacturing side now with scooters. You destroy the consumer side as well. And then the regulatory of things. Think about what it does to the confidence of the manufacturing industry. You want to buy domestic, then they immediately start to crack down on it. Who knows what's the next industry going to be that's going to face the same level of treatment? Now, the answer from the government is that they say, we're going to deploy rideshare scooters. You're going to have these public shared scooters that you can rent, right? Obviously, they're much more expensive to rent. It's not realistic for delivery drivers to rent them long term, because obviously that's really expensive than owning one. But it's also it's the blatant cluelessness that they have, saying that this is our solution to the problem. And this really, I think, reflects a broader problem with the way that the Chinese economy is working. Right now, their heavy focus is on the EV stuff, right? So if you're manufacturing EVs, you have a lot of opportunities. But if you're doing other side of manufacturing, for example, recently Foxconn has been moving a lot of their stuff away from China into India and Vietnam. In fact, this is a video from recent months that show Foxconn packing up their equipment and leaving Henan province, which is where Foxconn has been for a very long time, to India and Vietnam. Now, normally you'd think that there's a certain level of introspection that you have to look at to see that where did I go wrong for Foxconn to leave? Well, they didn't do that. Instead, they wrote articles saying that if Foxconn leaves China, well, they're going to be sidelined and they're going to be marginalized because, well, Foxconn needs China more than China needs Foxconn. But that's just not the reality. Take a look at this post. So this is a man who used to work at Foxconn. He got on his knees and he's thanking Foxconn for the time provided to this person's career opportunity. So in this here, he recounts of the difference between his experience working at Foxconn factories versus the local shoe manufacturing plant. So he says that he used to think Foxconn was a black factory, meaning that it was like, screwing people over. But only after he went to a local shoe factory in China did he realize that Foxconn was, its good side of it. He says that he wasn't allowed to go to restroom on his own during his time at the shoe factory, whereas at Foxconn he was allowed to take a 10-minute break every 2 hours, and he also had smoke breaks. And then at the shoe factory, he had to handle these hot pressed shoe molds, which he had to, wear gloves, right? He had to spend his own money out of pocket to buy gloves. They go through them very fast. But at Foxconn, they gave them a new pair of gloves every day, and they even encouraged them to get a fresh pair throughout the day if they start to break down. And he also brought up the salary comparison. So working 30 days at Foxconn, he made 4,500 yuan, and that was working a 10-hour day at Foxconn, right? And then at this local shoe factory, he also made 4,500 yuan a month, working 17 hours a day with all the things he described that he couldn't do, like breaks and stuff. And he also says that if you got sick at Foxconn, you didn't have to pay anything out of pocket. They took care of the medical expense. But now he has to pay for everything if he got injured or he's sick or something like that. And then listen to this is an excerpt from the article that I was referring to that is trashing Foxconn. It says here that the market is changing with each passing day, and no one is inseparable from the other. Even without Foxconn, a mobile phone foundry, Henan, the province where Foxconn was situated, can still find other ways out. Electric vehicles are rising rapidly around the world, which is a new opportunity for Henan. After decades of OEM production for Apple mobile phones, Henan itself has already cultivated a large number of high-quality workers who can continue to shine in the field of car manufacturing. Now, this seems to suggest that without Foxconn, Henan can still survive, and those workers can still survive. But guess what? They probably much prefer to work at Foxconn than these local Chinese factories because, well, we just heard from this man the experience that how different it was. And just to make you aware what the consequence of Foxconn leaving China would be, at the peak of its manufacturing season, it accounted for 25% of the GDP for the city that Foxconn factories were located at. So that shows you how much of the economic, opportunities it brought to China, to this particular province. But also just in general, the manufacturing decline is going to suffocate China's economy any further. Then I think we're going to witness some real concrete changes in society. And soon we might start to hear more people appreciate working for these foreign companies than ever before. All right, that's it today for the episode on why China is taking and cracking down all these e-scooters everywhere. And if you enjoy the content, leave a like, comment below your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, bye-bye.